Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the talk this morning. To introduce my talk, I'm doing this as a volunteer for Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and I was looking for something to do in my retirement. So a bit like a busman's holiday, I wanted to do something just similar to what I've been doing because I was a biology lecturer at the University of Chester. So, and I wanted to do something for conservation. So I asked them for a project and they said that they knew very little about reptiles in Cheshire. I knew it was going to be quite a challenge. More on that later. Yeah, it's really interesting and I'm really enjoying it. They're fascinating animals. Okay, I can't see the screen. I can only see the slide, so I can't see Sue. So, Sue, do you want me to just go ahead now?
Yeah, I've got your slides up on screen.
Yep.
You're down in the corner small. Away you go.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Right. So I will start. So that's me in the photograph holding a slow worm, which was unfortunately in Shropshire, not in Cheshire. But I was delighted to find that, or rather somebody else found it for me. So I thought I'd start off just by talking about a little bit about what reptiles are, because many people are a bit confused about the difference between reptiles and amphibians. So I'll just give you a clue here. There are 3 reptiles and 3 amphibians there. So that will maybe give you a bit of a start. But if I go through them, so top left, we've got a slow worm, which is a reptile. But the other 2 at the top there are both amphibians. So we've got a frog and a tadpole. And there's a massive difference between amphibians and reptiles in evolutionary terms, because amphibians are very much stuck with living near water. They have damp skin and they mostly reproduce by laying their eggs in water, whereas reptiles have made a huge evolutionary leap and they are able to live in very dry places, so like deserts, and they don't have damp skin. So at the bottom, we've got 2 more reptiles. We've got a common lizard and a grass snake. And in the middle is a great crested newt. And it looks, at first glance, very like the lizard. But in fact, they're very different because of its damp skin. And they are not fast movers, amphibians. If you think of frogs hopping along, newts drag themselves along, whereas lizards can really run fast. Okay, so this is a slide about types of reptiles. And you can see that many of them look fairly similar. So we've got the skink at the top there, and a lizard and a gecko and the chameleon. And they are all, in fact, quite closely related. And they're also quite closely related to the snake. So snakes evolved from a lizard-like animal that lost its legs. And the other 3 here are not closely related to these other reptiles. So crocodiles are one group, and turtles and tortoises, obviously, they're closely related to each other. But interestingly, the snakes and lizards group is more closely related to birds than it is to the crocodiles and turtles and tortoises. So and of course, the snakes and lizards group are the only ones that we have in this country. So it's quite a diverse group, sort of stuck together in evolutionary terms. Okay, so what is a reptile? How do we define it? So first, they were the first vertebrates to live on land, and they are mostly predators. So there are some tortoises that eat, that are herbivores, but most of them are pretty fast and are voracious predators. And the massive advance for them from amphibians is they evolved this waterproof scaly skin, which you can see in the picture here. So this is a grass snake sloughing off its skin. So you can see the scales from underneath, and you can even see the eye scale. So that has to be shed as well. when they shed their skin. So that's up there. And this means that they are very well protected from drying out. That's the most important thing, but also from damage and ultraviolet light and infections and so on. So they have a big advantage over amphibians. The disadvantage is that they have to shed their skin to grow, which you can see there. And they breathe with their lungs only, which you might think is quite an obvious thing, but amphibians don't. They use their skin, so it's damp, part of the reason for gas exchange, for respiratory gas exchange. And they have a very different mechanism of breathing. Whereas reptiles have large lungs and they can use those. And that's the reason why they can have dry skin. And I'm sure everybody knows reptiles are cold-blooded. And this means that they need to warm up to be active and they can't live in cold places. So there's lots of reptiles, snakes and things in hot places, but not in cold places. Okay, so just going on to a little bit about reproduction. So reptiles either produce waterproof eggs or they give birth to live young. And on the right there, you can see a snake just hatching out of an egg. And their eggs are leathery rather than like a hen's egg, which is brittle. So and you can see that there, so that's a soft egg. So that again is very different to the amphibians. So there's no aquatic larval stage. And the young are active and can fend for themselves straight away, although adults do often protect them. So going on to why I'm doing the survey. So, well, as I was saying at the beginning, it was Cheshire Wildlife Trust felt that they had very little information about reptiles in the county. And conservation in this country has become a very crucial thing. We're at a tipping point, really, for climate change as well, and biodiversity. And Britain in particular is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which is very sad. There was a recent State of Nature report that found that a quarter of mammals and half of the birds that they assessed were in danger of extinction. So this is a massive decline in our wildlife, and this was assessed since the 1970s. So our wildlife is being lost at a great rate. And I will send Sue the slides, and I'll put a link at the bottom to the State of Nature reports. If anybody's interested, they can read it. Okay, so why is this? Why is there such a huge decline? Well, the main reason is a loss of habitats. So our wild habitats are small, fragmented. So in other words, they don't have links between them, and they're degraded. So we have lovely wild places, but they tend to be very well used by people and dogs and so on. And of course, as well, we have the effect of climate change and pollution. And the intensification of farming has a massive effect on wildlife as well. So farming is very efficient in this country, but it doesn't leave much room for wildlife, unless, I mean, lots of farmers do provide especially for wildlife. So why survey? So surveying allows you to find where the wildlife is, and then it can be protected. Okay, so going on to reptiles in Cheshire. So what species do we have? We have, in fact, we've only got 4 species. So it did make identification very nice and simple for me, apart from telling males from females, which is a bit more complicated. But the 4 species that we have are common lizards, slow worms, grass snakes, and adders. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of these species. And they are all found in heathland, woodland, and grassland, although grass snakes are good swimmers and they require water as well. And reptiles are very rarely seen, and little is known about their distribution in the country generally, and certainly in Cheshire. All of them hibernate, so the survey can only take place from March to October, so they have quite a long hibernation time. The reason in Cheshire why they're doing so badly is that it's a very built-up county, and plus it's very agricultural. And I've just got this map to show you so that you can, just to illustrate that point. So, and this is obviously just part of Cheshire. And over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see Winsford. And Chester is over, would be off the screen on the left. So there are large built-up areas, and then the rest of it is mostly agricultural. So the white is agricultural land, and then we have very small areas which are suitable for wildlife such as reptiles. So we've got Delamere Forest, although of course a lot of that's coniferous plantations, so it's not that suitable. And we've got Little Budworth Common here, which is great, actually. I'm doing survey work there. And we've got the Sandstone Ridge, and part of the Peak District is in Cheshire as well. So, so there are small areas, but it just illustrates how separated they are. And also they have other uses. So like forestry, and also just for people as well, places to, wild places to go. Okay, so I'm going to talk now a little bit about the 4 species and tell you a little bit about them. Starting off with the common lizards. So you can see that picture there, and hopefully you can clearly see the scales. So if you're not sure whether it's a newt or a reptile, look closely and you should see the scales there. And they have more neck bones, reptiles, than amphibians. And you can see this lizard here holding its head up, so it's able to turn its head round much more than a newt can. So all about lizards. Our most common and widespread reptile, 10 to 15 centimeters long, so not very big, quite long lived, so 5 to 6 years, a small animal. And they eat invertebrates, so insects and spiders, and they're quite fast, and they can catch them with their tongue. They breed in July, and they produce live young, about 3 to 11 live babies. Small and dark they are when they're first, when they're juveniles. And they have this very interesting adaptation where they shed their tail to escape, which is, and it looks awful because it looks like you must have damaged them. I have to say, I only did this once when I was a child in the Mediterranean, and lizards were absolutely everywhere on holiday, and I didn't know. So lizards should be handled with great care and never caught by the tail. And they have a sort of weak spot at the top of the tail, and they can drop it, and they don't bleed or anything. But the tail carries on moving, which is an amazing adaptation, because it means that predators are going to go for the tail while the animal runs off, and then they regrow their tail with a stick of cartilage rather than vertebrae. And they're doing quite well in Cheshire, actually. They seem to be quite widespread. So I've had reports of them in Delamere Forest. Very nice chap working at Go8 told me he saw them regularly. I've been surveying at Bickerton Hill, and I've seen them there, and they seem to be doing well there. Up on the Wirral, they seem to be doing well. And somebody recently sent me a photograph of one in her back garden in Chester. So, so they seem to be reasonably widespread. Okay, so moving on to our second most common reptile in Cheshire, we've got the grass snakes. And again, you can really see the scales on the grass snake, recognised by the collar behind the head. So it's a sort of brownish green snake with a creamy collar with black behind it, just behind the head. So if you see that, it's a grass snake and it's harmless. It is not an adder. And I'm obviously coming on to adders so that you can tell the difference. Grass snakes are good swimmers. They're long. They're our longest reptile. As I was explaining, they have this greenish with a yellow and black collar. 90 to 150 centimeters long. So usually about adults are, about a meter long, and long-lived as well. So 15 to 25 years they live. And you can see this one swimming. You can recognize them if you do see anything swimming, because of course all reptiles are air breathing, so they have to come to the surface if they're aquatic to breathe. And this one is just holding its head above the water. And you can see it's moving with some speed there because it's you can see the ripples. And their prey is amphibians, fish, and they will also take small mammals and birds. And unlike the last two, the common lizards and, unlike the common lizards, they lay eggs. So they produce 10 to 40 eggs in rotting vegetation, which you often find by waterways. But they do very well in compost heaps as well in people's gardens. And they're quite widespread. Although I haven't found many myself, I've had quite a few reports of them. So, for example, I went on a visit to Chumley Castle Gardens, and I asked the gardener if they ever have any snakes. And he said they have grass snakes sitting on the lily pads in the pond. So I haven't seen them myself, but if you do go and you see them, do let me know. So they like to sun themselves there. And I also had a lady in Tarvin who said she used to have them in her garden. And I went to have a look. I didn't see them again, but the reason was that she had a massive pond and it was stuffed full of fish. So I guess it was a very good place for the grass snakes, plenty of prey. And she also had a massive compost heap. And she used to get the grass snake draping itself over a tree to sun itself to warm up. Okay, so that takes us on to number 3, which is the slow worm. And these look like snakes, but in fact they are legless lizards. And they have a very different sort of facial appearance. And you can probably make out the scales if you look closely. They're much more flattened than in the grass snake. So a legless lizard, and the reason that you can tell that is that they can shed their tail like the common lizard. They have that same adaptation, and also they can blink, which snakes can't. It's what makes snakes look a little bit evil, I think, because they have this staring eye, whereas I think slow worms look much more friendly. So they're a lot smaller than a snake, and they're smoother, and they tend to be lovely colours. So like this sort of golden colour that you can see in this slide, and the slide before it's sort of a greyish colour. So they vary in colour, but they tend to be rather attractive. I know I'm biased though. Okay, so bigger than a common lizard, but much smaller than the grass snakes at 40 to 50 centimeters long, and quite long-lived, so 20 years. These are the gardener's friend. They eat pests like slugs. So we should definitely be encouraging them in our gardens. And they used to be very common, but I've only seen them once in Cheshire. So they do seem to be doing very badly and are very rare in a lot of the country now. And they give birth to around 8 live young, so rare in Cheshire. They are doing well at Helsby allotments. So Helsby allotments, they wanted to extend the allotments, and they knew there were slow worms there. So they put in place very good protection for them and provided them with compost heaps and log piles and somewhere where they could hibernate as well. And they are also doing quite well at Risley Moss, which is an area which is highly protected, quite a large area near Warrington. Okay, when I started doing the survey, I got all the reports of where reptiles had been recorded in the county of Cheshire. And this is just one of the maps, which I just thought I'd put in here to illustrate how poorly slow worms are doing. So these are all the recordings of slow worms in the last 10 years. And I mean, the most obvious thing is that there's been very, very few records. The green spots are in the last year, and that's only Risley Moss, although when those records get updated, they are still doing well at Helsby. Yeah, so no sign of any in Hoole, but I'm going to go and have another look at Hoole allotments with Sue. But I very much doubt we're going to find them there. So they seem to have been wiped out over most of the county. Somebody else is surveying Basford, so I don't know whether they're still there, but that's quite an old record, 5 to 10 years old. Okay, so moving on to our last species, the adder. And to tell you about adders, of course, everybody probably knows that they are our only venomous snake. And they are thought of as being terribly deadly, but in the scheme of things, you are highly unlikely to be bitten by one because they're very shy and excuse me, unless you were to tread on one or pick one up, then you would be very unlikely to be bitten. Their venom is, and it's nasty, you should go to a hospital, but I've read that there's only been 10 people who've died of a adder bite in the last 100 years. And of course, they're extremely rare now as well. Easily recognized by the zigzag going down their back. So if you think back to that grass snake, it had a collar and no zigzag. So if you see that zigzag down the back, that will tell you it's an adder. And they're a shorter, stockier snake than a grass snake, and they have a red eye with a vertical pupil slip, whereas grass snakes have a round pupil slip, But I guess you won't be staring into their eyes too closely if you come across one. So quite a lot shorter. If you remember that grass snakes are about 1 metre long, they're only about 60 to 80 centimetres and live 15 years. And they hunt lizards, small mammals, and ground nesting birds. Give birth to up to 20 live young. And very rare in Cheshire. They are definitely Risley Moss, or as far as I know, they're still there. There's a moss near Crewe called Oakhanger Moss, where a lady has a farm next to it, and she owns the moss, and she has reported that they have adders there, and she's seen them in her garden. And they were recently reported at Bickerton Hill about 4 or 5 years ago, but they haven't been seen since. So I'm particularly looking for adders and slow worms because they to find if they're still in Cheshire very much at all. Oh, and I meant to say, so the male has a black zigzag down his back, so that's the male at the top, and the female has a brown zigzag. And they do an amazing courtship dance. The males will compete with each other. That's a male and female mating, but the males will try and push each other down, and they raise their heads right up and test their strength against each other. And then the strongest one will mate with the female. Okay, so I know I said there's only 4 reptile species in Cheshire, but I just want to mention sand lizards. Although there are none wild in Cheshire, they are one of the UK's rarest reptiles, and they have been bred at Chester Zoo. So they're not wild, but they have been and are still at Chester Zoo. And the zoo did a very good breeding program and released the sand lizards at Talacra, which is in North Wales. And that seemed to be very successful, so seemed to be doing well there. And they're rather stunning lizards, so 20 centimetres long, larger than our common lizard, live around 20 years. And this is a male, you can see in the picture. In the breeding season, they are very flashy with these bright green sides. If you want to see them, when things get back to normal, the wardens at Talacra will take you and show you where they are, so that you have a chance of seeing them. And the females are brown and much more camouflaged. Okay, so 4 species in Cheshire that I'm looking for, and I'm doing a survey, so I'm following a particular protocol to try and find where they are. So I started off by getting the records from the recording office, which is based at Chester Zoo, called Record, and I went and had a look at all those areas to see which were suitable areas for surveying. And the protocol is that you get 30 mats and you put them down in suitable places, sort of south-facing slopes, if possible next to a bit of cover. And the idea is that the reptiles will usually hide underneath them. Reptiles, being cold-blooded, need to warm up, so they need a warm place. So they need to expose themselves to the sun or be somewhere warm, but they don't want to be picked off by a predator like a bird of prey while they're warming up. So the idea is to do the survey, you put the mats out, and then you walk around the area slowly, looking for reptiles anywhere and everywhere, and then look under the mats. And I've found 1 lizard under my mats so far. So not massively successful, but the reason it's so unsuccessful is because I couldn't go out in lockdown. And the ideal time of year is March and April, well, late March, April, May, because that's when they come out of hibernation and they're slow and they have to warm up. And hopefully they're going to use my mats. So while you're looking, you look under the mats. So I'm surveying in about half a dozen different areas. I'm using bits of roofing felt because they're warm up well and they're light and they're easy to carry, about ½ meter square. And you also look in places like log piles. So this is the log pile at Helsby allotments, which is a good place, particularly for slow worms and lizards, because their prey will live in the log pile, and compost heaps and rotting vegetation. So this is the compost heap provided for the slow worms at Helsby allotment, with very specific instructions. So don't put anything sharp in, and make sure you top it up, and so on. But that has really helped them because they're doing very well there. Okay, so this is some of the finds. So over on the left, you can see a common lizard. And this was at Burton Mere Wetlands, the RSPB site near Nest Gardens. And if you want to see a common lizard, if you go there when the conditions are right, so ideally it's sort of when it's been cool or wet and then the sun comes out, they like to sit somewhere in the sun, but close to somewhere where they can rush off and hide themselves. And this picture is really interesting. I thought at first it was two lizards, and then when I looked closely, I realized that the lizard has a very different pattern on its tail, and it's probably because it's shed its tail and regrown it. So you can see its tail has a different pattern. Whoops, and it's darker. Okay, and then in the middle, we got a baby grass snake, and on the right-hand side. And this is being held by one of the lecturers at Reseath College who's doing, he manages Sound Heath, which is a site of special scientific interest. And he has got 80 mats down there. You can just see one of his mats down there in the corner. He uses corrugated ones. And he's been fantastically successful because he's found and identified 30 different baby grass snakes. As the babies hide under the mats, babies born September, hatched out of the eggs around September time, and they're very vulnerable to predators, so they need somewhere to hide. And he's just showing the ventral surface, the undersurface on the right-hand side there, and they each have very different markings. So he's been able to identify them. So he photographs them and compares the photographs, and he's identified 30 individuals, which is a very nice piece of work. Okay, but mostly what I've found, I have to confess, is ants, which you can see at the bottom right-hand side there. So ants absolutely love the mats, so it's a pity I'm not surveying for them. I don't know too much about ants. I don't know what the species are, but I think as a result of my survey, the numbers will be increasing. So they're quite small ones, and apparently the grass snakes don't like them. So if there are ants under the mats, the grass snakes try and get away from them. They sort of cower on one side because, of course, they don't eat ants, unlike common lizards. At the top right, there are some grass snake eggs. So that would be evidence of grass snakes. Other sorts of evidence that we might possibly find are sloughed skins, but I haven't found any yet. And also droppings, but they don't have droppings which are very characteristic. So it's not possible to identify the species from them. At Cholmondeley, I found this rather lovely pair of toads. So at least the mats were being enjoyed by a vertebrate of some description. But unfortunately, as yet, no reptiles. Okay, so I'm doing this survey, and when I find anything, I report it to Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and they can do various things to help reptiles. So obviously, number one is we need to identify where they are and protect those habitats, and if possible, extend them. Then the area can be managed for reptiles. So reptiles need a mosaic, really, diverse vegetation. So ideally patches of woodland and clear areas. So woodland is good because they can hide. Adders, for example, will hibernate under tree roots and that sort of place. But they also need clearings because they need to come out so that they can warm up before they can become active. So, so they need open areas, and they need areas which are suitable for their prey. So, for example, hummocky grassland is good for adders because it's the sort of place where mice and voles can hide. And there'll be plenty of grass and seeds and so on for them to eat. Whereas, of course, grass snakes need water, so ponds and streams and so on. So as well as managing areas for wildlife and making sure it stays suitable for them, it's also it's very helpful if they can to connect up suitable areas with wildlife corridors. So, for example, two of the areas I'm surveying are Bickerton Hill and Cholmondeley Castle Gardens, and they're actually quite close together. So, you know, I wonder whether it'd be possible to, if I find reptiles in both of those areas, whether things can be put in place to make a wildlife corridor. I haven't asked them about that yet, but that's a thought. And you can also add ponds, compost heaps, log piles, and hibernacular to an area. And this is the picture that I've given you is of an hibernaculum. So this is what they've provided at Helsby allotments for the slow worms. So basically you dig a pit and then you fill it with bits of wood, and pipes are very good, and so on, stones to make spaces for them. And make sure that they can get in. So there's an opening on the side there. I've lost my cursor. Oh, there it is, with a snake coming out. And in winter, it means that they can go fairly deep underground and they're protected from the frost. Then you just pile earth up on top. And that seems to have been very effective, as I say, for the slow worms. Other things that can be done, you can also reintroduce species, but it's been successful in some instances, so like the sand lizards at Talacra, but it is a very, very time-consuming exercise, and it will only be effective if the habitat is right. So if you think back to what I was saying earlier on, we've lost the reptiles because we haven't got the habitat. So that's what we need to be pushing towards. Studies suggest that we should have half of our land available for wildlife, because otherwise we're just going to get this continuous downward trend. So, well, it's recommended at least a third, but half would be much better. And we need to return a lot of the land to make it suitable for wildlife, not just for reptiles, but as I was saying at the beginning, birds and mammals are doing very badly as well. And you might have heard that insects are doing terribly badly. And we do depend on these species, so it's important for that reason. So yes, so one of the things we need to do to help wildlife is education as well, hence the talks this morning. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, can I do anything? What can I do? So gardens are very useful. You're unlikely to find any reptiles, but even so, it's still well worth doing because many species can be helped by improving our gardens. So compost heaps, if you don't keep a compost heap, it's a very easy thing to do, and I highly recommend it, because you get lovely compost for your plants, and it's a very quick, easy way of getting rid of weeds from your garden or vegetable peelings, anything that's not cooked vegetation wise. Cooked vegetables possibly might encourage rats, so it's best to use raw stuff. So any vegetation though, not woody stuff, because that won't rot down. And tea bags, turns out most of them have plastic in the outside, so they're not great either. But log piles are also very good. So if you're trimming back a hedge, if you have an unused corner, maybe behind the shed or something like that, if you pile up your wood, again, it's a nice, easy way to get rid of a wood, and it will rot down. But as it rots, it provides a lovely habitat for many invertebrates. which are, very important in the food chain, so are good for many other species. Undisturbed areas are good. Ponds are great. So I found this picture, which I thought illustrated a garden which lots of wildlife would do well in. You see the pond in the middle there. And avoiding pesticides if you possibly can. The other thing that you can do is, if you're out and about, look for reptiles. And if you should happen to see them, do let us know. If you just get on the internet and find Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and send your record into them, then it just increases our knowledge about them. And you might find one where we didn't know that they were there at all. So if you can possibly take a photograph, that's very useful, because we can tell things like, helps us to identify the species, but also how big it is, and whether it's an adult or a juvenile, and possibly even the sex. So if you know what the species is, then you could let us know that as well. If you see more than one, how many, how big they were, and the location. So grid reference is great, but if not, I mean, it might be the address if it's in a garden, or you might just say, well, Little Budworth Common somewhere in the north or something like that. Type of habitat. So was it in an open area, or was it in amongst brambles, or what? If you think that you have spotted a reptile, I can come and have a look. You can request a survey just by contacting Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and we could possibly put some mats down. The mats usually go down in February, and then you start the survey in March. So it's pretty much the wrong time of year now, except I am going to be out in September looking for juveniles in particular. And I'm hoping they'll be easier to find possibly than the adults. And if you would like to help, then you can volunteer. So a couple of members have been out with me, and I can show you how to go about doing the survey. And if you should be out and about and you spot some mats down, do feel free to have a look under them. It's going to be pretty safe to do so. You're unlikely to find any others, but should be done with caution. And you won't discourage the reptiles from using them. You just lift them up by the corner gently, look underneath, and then replace them exactly where they were. Okay, so I just want to finish up by talking a little bit about why should we care about reptiles. So biodiversity, as I was saying, has decreased massively. And of course, all of our wildlife is interconnected, and the loss may affect many other species. So they're part of a food chain. So they have prey animals, which will be affected if they're lost, and also predators. So their predators are mainly birds of prey and cats. But so yeah, slow worms in the garden apparently get eaten by cats. But that's by the by. We should care because if we have animals like reptiles, they're at the top of the food chain mostly, and it means that there is plenty of prey for them, and it's a sign of a healthy habitat. So the fact that they're there shows that there will be many other species there. So they're important from that point of view as well. And for us as well, wild places are enjoyed by many people, and it's very good for mental health. There's been quite a few studies done recently showing that going out into fresh air, the countryside, and just seeing wildlife is enjoyed by many people and can help people with depression and so on. So and I just feel devastated when I go out. So in lockdown, I've been out and done a lot of walking, and it's just very sad how little wildlife we have left. So I think it's very important for us, for our well-being. And it can provide employment. So we don't invest in our wildlife very much. So there are people like, wildlife rangers, and National Trust, of course, does a wonderful job, and the RSPB, and they provide employment for people, along with helping to protect our environments. And some species may have an economic value, not really reptiles, certainly not the ones in Cheshire. I don't want anybody to be harvesting those for economic value. But if we lose our wildlife, especially in plants and things, they can be useful for medicine. And often people have no idea what the value is. And times gone by, native people, for example, would have known much more than we do now. And it's part of our heritage, and they are fascinating animals. I hope I've managed to convey some of the fascination that I have to you today. So that's a baby sand lizard in the picture, and it's just sitting there resting on somebody's hand. But these are intelligent, fast predators with often that care for their young and have interesting behaviour. But I feel that all wildlife should be protected, and we need to make a place for all of it. Okay, so this is the last slide, and this is the one I'm going to send to Sue. So she's going to provide it for you so that you can click on the links. And I've got some fascinating films for you so that you can watch a little bit more about the 4 species that we have, just YouTube films. And also the 2 organisations that particularly work towards the conservation of amphibians and reptiles, ARG UK and NARS, so you can get some more information from them. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. So thank you very much for watching the talk and logging in today. And oh, there we are. So I can see Sue again.